edition of Happy Birthday Mr. Gould, the live streaming event that celebrates the birthday of the great Canadian pianist Glenn Gould from the Fazioli Showroom in Milan. I am Emanuele Stracchi, a pianist, a composer and associate of D Major TV, and today as a presenter. Before starting with the show, I want to thank our partner, the Glenn Gould Foundation, Mr. Brian Levine, the Executive Director of the Foundation, the Canadian Embassy for the support on social media, thanks to Mrs. Enrica Abate, Fazioli Pianoforte and Fazioli Showroom, for all the technical support and the splendid location that lodges us. This year's program is really exciting. Interviews and concerts to celebrate the genius of Glenn Gould. In addition to the room, you see here our President Alida Altemburg is live from the box, ready to interview our international guests. Hi Alida, how are you?
Hi Emanuele, I'm well. This year great news, I'm in the box, the place where I interview our fabulous guests. Ruth Abernathy, Brian Levine, Kevin Bazzana, and from Apple University, Professor Joshua Cohen. See you later.
Thanks, Alida. To this day, renowned Canadian pianist Glenn Gould continues to fascinate and entice fans and artists alike. Gould was very forward-thinking and embraced technology in a way that was unique among performing artists. He withdrew from concert hall at the age of 33 to pursue his projects with the recording studio and television programs. Gould has received numerous accolades for his work, including from Grammy Awards, 3 Juno Awards. He is one of the best known and celebrated classical pianists in modern history, with a style that was both deeply expressive and technically perfect. The Major TV is so happy to collaborate with the Glenn Gould Foundation to continue to spread the legacy of Mr. Gould. The Glenn Gould Foundation's mission is to honor Glenn Gould's spirit and legacy by celebrating brilliance, promoting creativity, and transforming lives through the power of music, and enhance with the Foundation's signature activities, including the Glenn Gould Prize. Both a national and international cultural institution, the Foundation's signature activity, the Glenn Gould Prize, is recognized as one of the world's premier honors in celebration of artistic excellence. The prize resonates strongly across borders and culture because of its connection to one of the world's preeminent musical icons, making it a gift from Canada to the world. The prize marks Canada as a global center of creativity and innovation. The Foundation continues to grow and embrace new opportunities. Its work tied to the spirit of individuality, excellence and creative innovation embodied by Glenn Gould himself. And now we turn to Alida from the box.
Thank you for joining me in the box live streaming from Toronto. Now we have a great friend of the Major TV, Mr. Brian Levine, the Executive Director of the Glenn Gould Foundation. Hello, Brian.
Hi, Alida. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm very happy that you are here. I have a lot of questions to ask you, and congratulations for the amazing conferences there in Toronto for celebrating Mr. Gould's birthday. Could you please tell us more about the Best Things event?
Thank you, Alida. Yes, well, as you know, like you, at the Glenn Gould Foundation, we like to organize events to honor Glenn Gould on his birthday. And this year it's going to be very special because, as your listeners will know, this remarkable professor, Joshua Cohen, he's a professor of political philosophy and moral philosophy, and he has become part of the faculty of Apple University. And Apple University was actually established by Steve Jobs to preserve a culture of perfectionism, innovation, and to keep true to the ideals that that Jobs had when he first started Apple, which is to make the best things that humanity has ever achieved available to everyone. So it's a profoundly democratic project. And to do that, Jobs decided that he would create an educational organization within Apple in which world-class scholars from many fields, including a large representation of the humanities, would attend and basically instruct Apple's senior management to keep that spirit alive, so that it isn't just focused on, the fastest connection or the highest resolution screen, but really using technology to meet human needs. And so Joshua, who before this was at MIT and then Stanford, and who is really a theorist whose field is democracy and keeping democracy healthy, allowing democracy to adapt to changing times, technology, circumstances, he was struck by this idea that the best things are what Apple's culture should be about, what anyone involved in technology should be thinking about. And so he created this remarkable curriculum called Best Things. And we will be bringing him to Toronto for 2 separate installments, which have a relationship to each other as different as their subject matter is. So on Glenn's birthday, Joshua will be presenting his full-length illustrated presentation called Gould's Variations and the Human Qualities that Foster Remarkable Creativity. And it is about Glenn Gould and how Glenn, later on in his life, went back to the Goldberg Variations, the piece of music that really established him as an international star, and he reinterpreted the whole thing, really from the very ground up. Every aspect of the performance is different, and it is, to the thinking of many people, a deeper, wiser, more meaningful, and more spiritual presentation of the Goldbergs, completely different from the first one. And really it also incorporates Glenn's ideas of technology and how to use it, and why technology is a source of liberation, of empowerment, of democratization, and also a moral responsibility for artists to engage with and use to maximize creativity, but also to make their art freely available to everyone in the world.
We are agree with you, Brian, and also we want to remember to our audience that far from Toronto to use the promo code DMajor15 for receive a discount for the live streaming that you made in the city of Toronto. I have a lot of questions because the fans ask me about the prize to Jessie Norman that you give to her this year with the Glenn Gould Foundation, and I know that surprises are not finished. You prepare some new anticipation, so I want to ask you also about Jessie Norman.
Okay, well, first of all, we were absolutely thrilled when our jury, and it was really the most remarkable jury, major artists from all over the world, 4 continents, in fact, led by someone that your audience may know, Viggo Mortensen, who a lot of people know from The Lord of the Rings. He was the chair of the jury, but we had people from music and from painting and from theater and from traditional culture and from Asia, all meeting together to basically confront the idea of why is the art so vital to being a human being and to a healthy society, and who could they choose who really reflected that ideal. And when they chose Jessie Norman, it really was this tremendous moment, because not only is Jessie Norman a truly great artist, and not only is she one of the greatest singers, I think, in the history of the world, in a huge range of different vocal ranges and styles, who really captures the power of the human spirit in her music, but also in her life, because throughout her life, first of all, she's been a champion for human dignity as an African-American woman growing up in the segregated South, going off and achieving world stardom, starting in Europe and then coming back to America, but also supporting the work of Dr. Martin Luther King for civil rights, singing and performing and campaigning for the freeing of Nelson Mandela, working with Elton John for his AIDS Foundation and organizing benefits for that, working for literacy through the New York Public Library, all sorts of different causes. And really it's about the fact that the artist has a responsibility in the world, not only to make the world more beautiful through art, but also to be a conscience, because conscience is really at the center of what art is and represents. So all of this, and all the way down to giving back to children by creating the Jesse Norman School of the Arts, which is a school that is about all the arts. It's multidisciplinary in her hometown of Augusta, Georgia, and almost all of the students who attend it are from, less economically advantaged neighborhoods. And these children grow and flourish, and their motto is that they become part of something larger than themselves, which I think is a great idea for anyone in the arts.
We are in Fazioli Showroom this year for the third edition of Happy Birthday Mr. Gould. Would you like to say greetings from Toronto or an happy birthday to Mr. Gould live streaming today?
Yes, absolutely. So, first of all, happy birthday not only to Glenn Gould, but warm greetings and so much love to you, Alida, and to D Major for all the work you do to promote music. We think you are amazing, and we are truly kindred spirits.
You are amazing, Brian.
you must be our sister in the spirit.
Thank you.
But also, we really encourage anyone who sees this, who hasn't bought a ticket, if you're in Toronto, if you're near Toronto, come and see it. You can see the information at www.glenngould.ca. And if you're not in Toronto, if you're anywhere else in the world, you can watch it via live stream, the entire full-length presentation of Joshua Cohen's presentations on Glenn Gould and the Goldberg Variations. That's on September 25th. And on Central Park, A Design for Democracy, on September 26th. And if you go to that URL, www.glenngould.ca, spell it correctly, 2 N's, everyone, you will be able to sign up for the live stream. And I just want to thank you again, Alida, for all your work for young artists, for classical music, and to keep the spirit of Glenn Gould alive in our time and in the future.
Thanks
Glenn
to
Gould
you.
really was a man of the future, and that is still true today. And as long as you're around and D Major is around, working together with us, that will be the case forever.
Thank you, Brian. We say greetings to the guys from the studio in Fazioli. Now we start with another concert. So, Brian Levine, the executive director of the Glenn Gould Foundation. See you soon, Brian, on live streaming.
Bye,
we follow Joshua Cohen now, live streaming from Toronto. A big kiss. And see you soon. Bye. Greetings.
Thanks to Brian Levine, Executive Director of the Glenn Gould Foundation, for this wonderful wish and all the support to D Major TV. This year, D Major TV has launched the first fan-made documentary on Glenn Gould. On the website www.glenngould.tv, you can discover the legacy of Glenn Gould with interviews including Glenn's friends, Ben Edkist, Lauren Tolk, Eric Till, John Fraser, and many others. Here you are!
Hello, Emanuele. As I promised, I have time to reach you, and it's time to play something. The first tribute to Glenn Gould.
Exactly.
What you have prepared for this special event?
I brought you from 6 back pieces that I'm particularly fond of.
Wow. Now, while you sit down at the piano, I'll introduce you. Emanuele Stracchi will play Bach's 6 Small Prelude.
Enjoy.
This month is Glenn Gould's month, and through the hashtag we are receiving lots of pictures. If you have with a Glenn Gould record, with a poster, or you have been in front of the Glenn Gould studio and you have a picture when Glenn's beautiful bronze sculpture, send it to us and we will publish it on our website. About Glenn Gould's portrait in bronze, and now we turn to Alida for the next interview.
Thanks to the studio for joining us. Here we are in the box of interviews with a very special guest. Reporting from Toronto, the sculptor Ruth Abernethy, creator of the portrait of Glenn Gould in bronze, which is located in front of Glenn Gould Studio CBC in Toronto, and that this year celebrate the 20th anniversary. We warmly welcome to Ruth Abernethy. Hello.
Thank you. Greetings from Canada.
How are you?
I'm well. I'm well. It's fascinating to come against this beautiful anniversary and really absorb 20 years. My goodness.
We met in Toronto last year during the filming of the documentary Nice to Meet You, Glenn, where you told us many details of how the sculpture dedicated to Glenn Gould was born. How do you feel today for this extraordinary 20th anniversary?
It's an important 20 years for me, so a huge personal milestone. My sons were 2 years old and 4 years old when I made Glenn, and now they are both engaged to be married. So in a personal way, it's huge. And I think watching Glenn develop an audience and become an icon for Toronto is a parallel story and fascinating.
But what do you remember in particular about the 1999 presentation of the sculpture to the public?
It was a gift giving. There was a sense when you have the perfect gift for someone and you can hardly wait for them to see it. I mean, I can be my own harshest critic, and I knew that I had done a portrait that I would be pleased with. We'd had sessions with a select group of foundation members. I knew that friends of Gould's felt that it was the portrait, and there was a lovely sense of anticipation and excitement about sharing it. I mean, this was Glenn, notoriously hidden away from the public and his audience, now being shared with the public and his audience. A fabulous sense of gift giving.
Well, the sculpture of Glenn Gould is a truly unique work. I can remember when I sat next to Glenn on the bench and I had the feeling that he can talk to me at any moment. And a question that intrigued me a lot is how if the sculpture, since it's exposed to the elements, needs some special maintenance.
That's the beauty of bronze, that it needs very little. It is not a demanding metal, which of course is why it's used for commemorative works, statuary. It's primarily copper, about 90% copper. So in that respect, it is easily worked by hand, that's part of it. But no, an annual wash down with soap and water and a bit of wax is all that anyone ever advises. And truthfully, most of my works, including Glenn, don't get that. They're loved by many hands and they have very shiny parts on them now, but no, maintenance of bronze is not complex.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's a lot of pictures on the web and Instagram that people make pictures with this amazing sculpture, and we can all admire the splendid sculpture, but not only that, every 3 years the Glenn Gould Foundation assigns the Glenn Gould Prize, that we could define the Nobel Prize of the art. The famous statuette is designed and sculpted by you, and I had the honor to hold in it, and I can tell you that I was tempted to take it away. The prize was awarded also among among the others, to Leonard Cohen, Philip Glass, Yo-Yo Ma, and the last year went to Jesse Norman, well, at the beginning of this year. We are curious to know how every 3 years you work on these unique pieces, which are then the Glenn Gould Prize. And I would like to ask you also if you have a favorite Glenn Gould Prize artist.
In actual fact, I didn't skirt the issue, but what the figuring now is quite different than what had been awarded for the first Glenn Gould prizes. The prize itself being comprised of a cash and other gifts, and my small walking Glenn I called the Glenn Gould Award, just because it is part of the larger prize. I worked that on my lap from memory of one of the photographs taken by Don Hunstein and at the request, and then the shadow base was added because it was much more succinct than the first stone base. There is a mold made of it, of course, so that it can be repeated, but of course molds change and break down over time, so it's up to me to do the fine-tuning every time it's made and make sure that it is consistent with prior gifts. And I do love it. I have to say, with the best pieces just arrive.
Well, I would love also to ask you, what does Glenn represent in your life and as an artist? Is there anything in him that you find yourself in?
Yes, actually. Glenn is one of a number of musicians and artists that I have sculpted. He was the first, I think. I studied piano, did get as far as my grade 9 conservatory, but at that point it only makes me more in awe of what Glenn Gould actually represents. Anyone can learn the notes on a piano, but that's where he existed in such another plane that it really just makes me a more humble audience, I think. But I would offer that in trying to create something that is not apparent to everyone, you inevitably create a dislocation, a bit of space between yourself and other people. And then, oddly enough, that is balanced by the fact that when you create something true, like Glenn's perfect phrasing on some element of music, and people are stopped in their tracks because it's not just familiar, it's true. I put Gould's features there. People knew what he looked like. It's beyond familiar. If you overcome that dislocation from other people that your talent sets you up to create, when you make something that is true, and that's the point at which it connects again with everyone else. And I think that's inevitable. I have an awful lot of solitude in the studio, and I would never claim I do make no claim to being, in the world of Glenn Gould. That to me seems ridiculous. But I think there are patterns of creation that demand separation and then are realigned with the sharing of what you create. And I think that is a pattern that is striking and true in itself for anyone who does creative work.
Ruth, it's a pleasure to listen to you and to have you here live streaming today for celebrating the third edition of Happy Birthday Mr. Gould, for celebrate, of course, the birthday of the great Glenn Gould. Would you like to say something to our audience that's following us live broadcast today?
Oh, congratulations. It has been such a pleasure to join a host of people who have lived in the shadow and in the legacy of Glenn Gould. I'm honored and I celebrate with all of you. Enjoy every note.
Thanks a lot, dear Ruth. We are following you on the social media. Of course, happy birthday to Mr. Gould. Many thanks to the sculptor Ruth Abernathy for this wonderful interview, and we congratulate to you for your amazing work and for this gift that you made to the humanity, the wonderful sculpture portrait of Glenn Gould. And today we celebrate the birthday of the great Glenn Gould. Thank you, Ruth Abernathy.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Alida, for this wonderful interview, and congratulations to Ruth Abernethy. I remind you that while we are live streaming in Toronto, preparations have begun for the Best Things Conference with Prof. Joshua Cohen of Apple University with a special on Goldberg variations. Here's the link. I recommend to use the promo code DIMAGERS15 and you will have 15% discount on the premiere. Here comes Alida.
Live from Fazioli Showroom for Happy Birthday Mr. Gould, the 3rd edition, we have a very special guest, the tuner of Fazioli, Davide Lupatelli. Hello. Hello Davide, how are you?
I'm fine, sto bene, grazie.
Thank you so much for being today here. Thank you for the amazing hospitality that you give a perfect guest. I would love to ask you, as a tuner and as a Glenn Gould fan, of course, what inspires you about Glenn Gould?
Glenn Gould è una fonte di ispirazione per tutto, dal suono al tocco a tutta l'immaginazione musicale.
Davide says that Glenn Gould is a source of inspiration in his way to play, in his sound. So I love when you tune this piano, and I know you work with another great Canadian pianist.
Oh, yes.
And this Canadian pianist is Angela Hewitt.
Yes, of course.
She wrote an amazing introduction to the book of Mr. Kevin Bazzana, the official biographer of Glenn Gould. And she also won the Bach Prize when she was at the beginning of her career. How it is to work with such an incredible artist.
Lavorare per Angela Hewitt è impegnativo perché lei ha una sensibilità nelle mani notevole e dunque la preparazione del pianoforte deve essere veramente all'altezza delle sue qualità.
Work with Angela Hewitt is a very challenging work. She has a great sensitive in her hands, and when she plays, she put her soul, and her sound is so pure, so amazing.
Yes.
She's pretty demanding.
E lei ha proprio una tale sensibilità nelle mani e anche ha un orecchio musicale incredibile. Il pianoforte deve essere veramente alla sua altezza.
She has a kind of perfect pitch. When she plays, when she put all her soul in her performance, so the piano must be tuned in a perfect way. So congratulations for this amazing work, because the tuner is very important. It's the fundamental part for an artist, of course, and for the audience that listen. And would you like to remember to our audience where they can find the Fazioli website?
www.fazioli.com.
So guys, www.fazioli.com. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you and TV Major.
Oh, thank you too. So we see you soon in the Major TV. We're following you also on social media. You're very active. You put a lot of concerts all around. So thank you so much to Davide Lupatelli.
Thank you.
And
happy
birthday, Mr. Gould.
And now Luca plays for us Beethoven, Opus 109. another special guest, Kevin Mazzani.
And welcome to the Skype box for another interview. Reporting from British Columbia, Mr. Kevin Bazzana, scholar and biographer of Glenn Gould. Hi, Kevin.
Hi again to D Major TV.
How are you?
Good, I'm happy to be back.
Thanks a lot for reaching us today for this event, Happy Birthday Mr. Gould, 3rd edition. Like every year on September 25th, we celebrate his genius during his birthday. As our audience know, you are the author of 2 important books of Glenn, Wondrous Range and Glenn Gould, the Performer in the Work, 2 milestones for the fans of the great Canadian pianist. There are many questions that come to us from the fans all over the world, and they are so curious to know how your passion for Glenn Gould was born.
Well, I actually did not know who he was until I was 19. He died when I was 19, and I was living in a big Canadian city at the time, and so we got a lot of CBC. And I kept hearing all of these news reports about this famous Canadian pianist who had just died. And as I said, I didn't know who he was. And they talked about him, they played his recordings. And then about a week after he died, CBC television broadcast the film of the Goldberg Variations. And I thought, who is this guy? And from then on, I was captivated by him. He was obviously an extraordinary and unusual musician, and I immediately wanted to know more about him. Very shortly thereafter, I read Jeffrey Payzant's book, and from then on, I've just kept feeding my brain with more and more Glenn Gould.
Of course, there are many fanciful stories about Glenn which made him almost mythological figure. Isolation, particular repertoire, Bach, Globe and chair. What do you think of Glenn's lifestyle? Was he really a hermit, or do you think he was secretly cultivating a more social life?
Well, one thing I discovered after doing a lot of research, and especially talking to the people that knew him best, the ones who knew him closely and in private, was that a lot of the Gould stories and legends and myths were true to some degree, but exaggerated. And, you know, for instance, I mean, it's very true that he loved solitude and spent a lot of time alone and was nourished by solitude, but it's not the case that he was a hermit. I mean, he was in touch with people all the time, and not just by telephone. One very interesting thing I was told is that, he would get up at 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and very often the first thing he would do in a day was go to the CBC building. And not because he necessarily had a broadcast to do, he would just go there to hang around. He'd sit around with people, he'd gossip, he'd get his mail there. So, it's really not true that he couldn't do without people. He did relish his solitude, but he did relish company. And all sorts of things like his refusal to shake hands and all of these stories about him. Very often true to some degree, but greatly exaggerated.
So, another question is Glenn Gould and love. A relationship that is often described as a confrontational. Regarding the biographies, his women generally say that he was a true gentleman of the past, very respectful and polite. Generally speaking of Cornelia Foss as his girlfriend, but in a fond letter there seems to be a declaration of love to a mysterious woman.
Well, I think you're talking about that sort of quasi-letter that has something to do with someone named Dell. Yeah, that I wrote about that in my biography. That's not what people think it is. That's not a love letter. It's a very strange document, and I sort of explain why I think that is. I don't think that has anything to do with real people in his life. But what you said about people saying that he was very courteous and gentlemanly with women, that's definitely true. Although, I get a sense that with his girlfriends, he could also be very controlling and even a little paranoid. And I have a feeling that it was very difficult and frankly exhausting to be his girlfriend, precisely because the controlling aspect of his personality, I think, came out quite strongly in that particular situation. And it must have been a little bit overwhelming, I think, to be in a real close relationship with him. Even some of his close friends felt sometimes that he could be an exhausting person.
In addition to gossip, we talk about music today, and which interests us a lot, especially to understand how Glenn got interest very early in electronic instruments, the radio and the microphone. At the time it was a real revolution using recorders like Glenn, and leaving the concert career must not have been easy for him initially. In your opinion, have there ever been any moments in Glenn's life when he wanted to get back on the scene?
Oh, you mean back on stage? No, that's absolutely not. That was genuine. His hatred of performing in public, that was, not only was that genuine, but it went back a long, long way. I mean, he himself said, when he was very young, 13, 15, it was fun to give concerts, but as soon as he became a professional, even in his late teens and his early 20s, even before he had left Canada, he was already talking about concerts being an unimportant part of his musical life, wanting to leave that behind in favor of recording and writing and composing and so forth. So, no, and once he left it behind, there's absolutely no evidence that he ever considered going back. And he turned down a lot of money. If he had wanted to give a comeback recital at any point in his later life, he could have made a fortune, but he just wasn't interested.
So he dedicated his life to video and to recording, of course, and every time we listen to a record or watch a video of Glenn, we always manage to find new aspects of readings, which are always of a disarming freshness. In your opinion, what are the amazing aspects of Glenn's recordings, and what captured the audience so convincingly?
Well, I was immediately captured by how individual he was. I mean, I didn't know who he was when he died, but I listened to a lot of classical music up to that point, and it was immediately obvious how individual he was. And the thing about his recordings is, no matter how much time passes, they still sound individual. And I think if we listen to only 2 or 3 people from the 20th century, 500 years from now, I'm sure Gould will be one of them, because I'm sure he will always sound individual and unlike anyone else. And another thing is that, and this applies to his playing as well as his interpretations, just so strikingly personal. But also his recordings are of a very high quality in terms of technology. When you think about the fact that he was recording, in the 50s, 60s, 70s with tape and razor blades, and the sheer quality of his recordings is extraordinary. They sound immaculate even by modern standards, and there's something really, really compelling about them as performances and as recordings. And I have a feeling that will always be true.
Yeah, we are totally agree with your opinion. But as a writer and author, Glenn was also very fond of writing, and he was very active as a journalist. What do you think about his way of writing?
Well, okay. One thing I have to say is that a lot of the people that admire his writing the most speak English as a second language. And I don't know this for sure, but I have a suspicion that the people who have translated Gould's writings have improved his writing slightly. Gould's early writings in particular are really not very good as examples of English language writing, I have to say. He did get better as a writer with age, and so there's a wonderful sort of casual, attractive quality to some of his later writings, particularly when he's writing about himself and his own life and so forth. His early writings are sometimes unbelievably tangled and just impossible to understand. And when you think that some of these writings were delivered as lectures, it just must have been it must have been impossible to understand what he was talking about. And some of the opinions he expressed, Gould's writings are very important for anyone who's interested in Gould. You won't necessarily learn a lot of good, reliable information about things other than Gould from his writings. And here's one other thing I did notice about his writings. When he was writing about something he liked, he was much more informed and much more convincing. When he was writing about things he didn't like, frankly, he usually didn't know what he was talking about. So if you want to learn something about Monteverdi or Mozart or Schumann or Chopin or Stravinsky or Rachmaninoff, you won't find it in Gould's writings. He just didn't know and didn't care. But they're indispensable for learning about him and what he valued and what he cared about. And like I say, in terms of writing style, he did improve greatly as a writer. And it's frankly a shame that we didn't get to read, autobiographical writings that he was considering doing in his later years, but didn't live to do. Those would have been interesting and probably very attractive pieces of writing.
Absolutely. In your deep interview can be found in the documentary Nice to Meet You, Glenn, made by Major TV, where you also tell us many anecdotes about Glenn and about the research you did. Is there any curiosity you'd like to tell us that you haven't revealed yet? We are waiting also for your famous book number 3 about the posthumous life of Glenn Gould.
I know, yeah, we discussed this last time. I could very much justify writing a third book about Gould, dealing entirely with his posthumous life. There's a great deal there that's happened since my book was published that I would love to include. And in fact, there was a great deal I wrote about his posthumous life in the book that had to be taken out just for reasons of length. I'm stumped by this question. I'm not sure I can answer it. Maybe this is a sign that I've written too much about Glenn Gould. I can't think of any exciting, thrilling secrets that I haven't revealed. I'll try to think of one before we hang up.
We are waiting for the posthumous life of Glenn, book 3.
Yes, the trilogy.
The trilogy, yes. Thank you so much to Kevin Bazzana, author, biographer of Glenn Gould, for being here today for the 3rd edition of Happy Birthday Mr. Gould. We have an international audience. Would you like to say something to them that follow this live streaming today with us?
Well, I suppose I have to say happy birthday to Mr. Glenn Gould, who would be what this year, 87? Wow, happy 87th birthday, and hi to everyone at B Major TV. And you're doing wonderful work here. I'm really happy to be part of it. I really like what you're doing. So keep doing it.
Thanks a lot, Kevin. A warm hug, and we look forward to seeing you soon for news about the world of Glenn Gould, for your Bazzana's trilogy, and back to you guys in the studio.
Thank you very much.
Dear friends, if you are following us live, remember to leave us a comment below. Remember the hashtag #MenthOfGould and continue to celebrate the birthday of the Rogenda again. I see Alida coming back. Hi Alida, you are gorgeous.
Thank you.
And now, you play?
I will play the Contrapunctus number 1 of Johann Sebastian Bach, Art of Fugue.
Thanks. Thanks, Alida. See you soon.
Thank you, Emanuele. I'm getting ready for another great interview. Live from Fazioli Showroom, today we are here with Fabio Albertini, Technical Supervisor of Fazioli Showroom, pianist, teacher and official tuner of Fazioli Showroom. Hello Fabio.
Hello Alida.
I have a lot of questions to ask you. First of all, what inspires you about Glenn Gould?
Sicuramente la sua lettura innovativa nel repertorio con Bach e con Beethoven.
For sure, it's innovative lectures of Bach and Beethoven. So, tell us about yourself as a tuner of Fazioli Showroom.
Io ho iniziato da ragazzino a interessarmi a questo lavoro, poi ho avuto la fortuna più in là negli anni di incontrare l'ingegner Fazioli e qui da lì è nata una collaborazione.
I started when I was a kid at a conservatory, and after some times I met the engineer Paolo Fazioli, and so this adventure began, and now you're here at Fazioli Showroom, and you do an amazing job. The story of Fazioli piano is very fascinating, and it's a story of innovation. Could you please show us some characteristics of the instruments?
Noi qui abbiamo il Fazioli l'F278 ed è uno strumento come tutti gli altri della gamma che si differenzia proprio per il timbro cristallino e per alcune innovazioni come i risuonatori accordabili, per esempio è il quarto pedale.
We are here with this jewel of the manufacturing, the model 278, and this model is different from the others, and its distinctive trait is the rich and transparent tone, and for example is distinguished for the fourth pedal. Is it true? It's a very big innovation in the world of music. This piano that we have here is a jewel for the eyes and a pleasure for the ears. And I wanted to play something for us for celebrating the best way, Mr. Gould. What would you like to play today for celebrating the Gould?
Chopin, notturno opera 27 numero 2.
Enjoy Chopin. I'm here with a very special guest, Professor Joshua Cohen, philosopher from Apple University, who will hold a very interesting conference in Toronto entitled Gould's Variation and Inhuman Qualities That Foster Remarkable Creativity with the Glenn Gould Foundation. Hello, Joshua.
Hello, Alida. How are you?
I'm fine.
So nice to be here with you.
Nice to meet you too. It's a pleasure to be here for Celebrate Glenn Gould together.
Yes, it is a pleasure. I'm always happy to celebrate Glenn Gould. Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you again for this interview. And before to beginning the discussion, how did your passion for Mr. Gould come about?
Well, Alida, it came about in two steps. The first step was I wanted to give a presentation at Apple about some great product. And I wanted to find something that was iconically great, that I could tell an interesting story about, and where there are lots of visual assets, audio, video, and images that I could include in the presentation. I thought about Glenn Gould and the recording of the Goldberg Variations as one possibility. That was step one. Step two was that I started to dig into the story about Glenn Gould and see the incredible array of the treasures of assets that were available, all the not just the recordings, but I've got here the complete BBC broadcasts of Glenn Gould. It's 10 DVDs from 1954 to 1977. I watched the film of Glenn Gould going to the Soviet Union in 1957. I couldn't believe he's 24 years old and people are making a film. Anyway, the more I learned about him, the more I thought, this is an amazing story. That's how I got my passion for it.
Wow.
It was by learning about it. Yeah.
You're a super expert. I imagine you watch a lot of films and documentaries and listen to his music, and inspires a lot you. So today in Toronto, we hold a conference with the Glenn Gould Foundation. We say hello to Brian Levine, which brings this conference, as you said, as a training program to the Apple University. Excellence in the world of technology and beyond. I've read that best things are when you try to bring these things in what you're doing. We are curious to learn more what you're saying during this amazing conference.
Yeah. So the presentation about Glenn Gould and the 1981 re-recording of the Goldberg Variations, which was then released in 1982, made in 1981. It's part of a series of presentations that I give at Apple University, which is an educational program for Apple employees. And the series is called The Best Things, as you said, Alida. And the reason it's called The Best Things, it came from a comment that Steve Jobs made about 25 years ago. He was doing an interview and he was explaining how you make great products. And he said, it comes down to taste. And then he said, it comes down to exposing yourself to the best things humans have done, and then bringing those things into what you are doing. So I thought, that sounds like a good idea, to expose yourself to the best things humans have. And the performance of Glenn Gould's recording of the Goldberg Variations seemed like a best thing, and I developed the presentation around that. That's the basic idea. Now, the core, I'm a philosopher, as you said, I'm a philosopher. So when I was thinking about Glenn Gould, I was looking for what is the really fundamental idea that he has about musical performance, about art generally and musical performance in particular, that really is the North Star, the guiding light of what he does. And what I came to is something that he said sometimes, which is that great musical performance aims at an experience of ecstasy. Ecstasy means literally, ecstasis, the Greek word, means literally standing outside. You know? Now, I thought this was a really amazing idea because, first of all, it says the great musical performance doesn't only have an aesthetic purpose, it has an ethical purpose, because it's about conveying an idea about the world in general. So that's the first thing. And then I thought, can I take that idea about ecstasy as an experience of standing at a distance from the world and use that as a way to understand why he plays the way he plays? How does he take that abstract idea, that integrative abstract idea, and turn it into what he's doing with the tools that he's got, which are just basically 10 fingers? How does that abstraction guide what he's doing with those fingers? That's what the presentation is about.
It's incredible. So Glenn, as you said, create a kind of transcendental experience for the audience also, because when we listen to him, we're very involved in his performance, and it seems he's present. When he recorded, and it seems very present. So he was not only a forerunner as a pianist, but he was also a media man and a thinker. And the question is, his message now can be considered so current and can inspire also young generations.
Yes, you know, there's an amazing article that he wrote about Richard Strauss and the future of music. It's a beautiful article in which he talks about he uses this phrase. I think it's an amazing phrase. He talks about multi-level participation in the creative process. And he talks about a participant public. And sometimes he talks about making music into more of a phrase of his, more of a democratic assemblage. So what he discovered remix culture before it, avant la lettre, it was a remix culture. And what he realized was that these new and emerging recording technologies created possibilities not only for the composer and not only for the performer, but also for the audience to be, as he puts it, participants in the creative process. And I think he, instead of thinking that technology and the use of technology in artistic performance was somehow damaging to the human aspects of the performance, he thought of the technology as fundamentally augmenting human capacities, making the performance even better. So I think he would have been incredibly excited about the possibilities that current technologies make available.
We are 100% agree with you.
Agree about that?
Yeah.
Do you agree about that? You agree about that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Also in you talk about this article, very, very interesting to read. Also in the biography of Glenn Gould, Such Wondrous Range of Kevin Bazzana, we noticed Glenn Gould's constant research for perfection, like the achievement of an ideal. What are the reasons that encourage someone to go down that path?
Yeah. So, I have to say, Kevin Bazzana, who I've never met, though I've corresponded with him a little bit, he wrote 2 books on Gould. The one that you mentioned, Wondrous Strange, and then he has another one, which I just happen to have on my desk here,
oh, wow.
called Glenn Gould, The Performer in the Work, and it's based on his PhD dissertation, which he wrote at University of California, Berkeley. I think it's a fantastic book. I like Wondrous Strange a lot. This is a really very special book. It's the best thing I think that's ever been written that explains the relationship between Gould's ideas about music and great musical performance and how he's playing, his interest in structure and architecture, and how that results in tempo decisions and So it's a fantastic book. Now, I hope I get to meet Kevin sometime. I know you're interviewing him. That's great.
Say hello to you also.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's really fantastic, this book of his. Why is somebody concerned about perfection? So here's how I think about that. I have no doubt, Glenn Gould was a perfectionist, absolutely, for sure. But the thing that really interests me about Gould was not so much that he was a perfectionist, but what he thought perfection is. Perfection means making something as good as it can be. I think that's it. But then what I want to know is, what did he think makes something good? What makes musical performance really great? When you understand that, then what he wants to do is to make it better and better. And I think, to go back to the previous comments, that what he thought great musical performance aims at this experience of ecstasy, and to create that experience of ecstasy, of standing outside the world. What you need to do is to create musical performances that are so enveloping, that embrace you so much, that create an architecture that you can live inside, and that's how you keep the world at a distance. And I think when he's aiming at perfection, what he's trying to do is to really create that experience, both for himself and for the listener, because he said the listener is the ultimate end in music. To create that experience for the performer and the listener, that you've got you have another place to reside while you're listening to the music, another place to live, and that requires a perfection in the architecture to keep the world at a distance.
There is another question that's fascinating me very much. It's about a quote of Mr. Gould. It's about the audience became the art. Would you like to say something about this quote?
Yeah, I have that in the presentation that I'm going to be giving in Toronto on Glenn Gould. What he says is that in the future of technology, he sees the possibility of the audience becoming the artist and their life becoming art. And when people hear that comment from Gould, they're very surprised, because he seems so wrapped up in himself, that the idea that he's concerned about the audience and the capabilities of the audience comes as a surprise to them. But I don't think about Glenn Gould that way at all. I think of him as having devoted his life to communicating something great, people, because he thought not just that it was great for the music or great for him, but he was trying to honor the listeners, and honor the listeners not by giving them something that would be pleasing to them, but by giving something that he thought was great, that was done right. So I think it grows, kind of naturally grows out of that he also liked the idea that new recording technologies we're going to give individuals the capacities that composers had and that performers had, that capacity for a kind of creative expression. So I think that's part of, in my impression of Glenn Gould, that's part of who he was, somebody who really wanted to enhance human lives. That's why he did what he did.
Well, Joshua, I listen to you for hours. Thank you so much for being here. We can say happy birthday together to Mr. Gould.
Thank you. Yes, let's do that. Okay.
3, 2, 1. Happy birthday, Mr. Gould.
Mr. Gould.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So follow the live streaming of the Glenn Gould Foundation for the speech and the conference in Toronto, Besting with Professor Joshua Cohen. Thanks again, and the line goes back to the studio to Emanuele for the concerts. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching us here live today from the beautiful location of Fazioli Showroom in Milan. Thanks to all our guests, Ruth Abernethy, Brian Levine, Kevin Bazzana, Professor Joshua Cohen, and a super special thanks to the talented Amy Kitchen, designer of the Glenn Gould Foundation. Special team at the Glenn Gould Foundation, our partner at the Canadian Embassy for the patronage and social media support. A special thanks to all the staff of Fazioli Pianoforti, Luca Carmicelli, Fabio Albertini and Davide Lupatelli for today's splendid location and all the support. Thank you to Emanuele, thanks to all the fans who following with so much love and affection this live streaming Happy Birthday Mr.Gould that has reached the 3rd edition dedicated to Glenn Gould on his birthday. Happy birthday Mr. Gould!
A big thanks to our president, Alida Altemburg.
Thank you. I reply. Thanks Mr. Alberto Polini for all his time, passion and dedication that he put on his project, acting videos, making logistics and organizing everything to the fullest. Our applause goes to him. Thank you.
We look forward to seeing you on the major TV's social pages. Nice to meet you, Glenn, and on the Glenn Gould Foundation.
And now Emanuele has surprises.